Welcome back to Void of Fears. Before we jump into today's story, I've got to ask for a quick favour. If you could smash that like button, drop a comment below, and hit subscribe if you haven't already. It seriously makes a huge difference. YouTube's algorithm loves that stuff, and it pushes my videos to new viewers who might dig these stories too. I really appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to do that. It means the world to me and helps keep this channel growing. Alright, enough of me rambling. Let's dive into today's story. The phone is ringing again. Same harmonized voices, same impossible unison, same message. Come home, Conrad. Come remember what you really are. I've been ignoring it for 6 hours, but the sound is getting louder, more insistent. And now I can hear it coming from inside my own skull. My name is Conrad Halloway, and I'm going to die tonight. Not from old age or disease, but because something the size of a planet has finally remembered my name. What I discovered working for the CIA will haunt humanity's final hours, assuming anyone survives long enough to be haunted, because everything we call reality is a lie, and the thing that's been pretending to be our world for millions of years just decided to stop pretending. I should start at the beginning, but the beginning is a lie too. I thought I was a geophysicist for 23 years before that night in March when I learned the Earth doesn't exist. My specialty was planetary crust stability, analysing seismic waves to understand how earthquakes propagate through rock layers, numbers and patterns that followed immutable laws, predictable as clockwork. That predictability died screaming at 11:43 p.m. when Jakarta turned inside out. But first, let me tell you about the dreams I'd been having for 3 years before Jakarta. Dreams where I walked through tunnels of living stone, following pathways that pulsed with bioluminescent veins. In these dreams, I carried instruments I'd never seen before, taking readings from walls that breathed and floors that whispered. I would wake with the taste of copper and ozone in my mouth, and coordinates burned into my memory that I'd hastily scrawl in notebooks before forgetting them entirely. Those coordinates always led to places where I'd later detect seismic anomalies. I told myself it was coincidence. Pattern recognition gone haywire. The human brain's tendency to find connections where none existed. But the dreams grew more detailed, more specific. I began to recognize the tunnels, to know which passages led where. Sometimes I'd dream of other people walking beside me, colleagues I'd never met, but somehow knew intimately. We moved with purpose through these underground networks, serving a function I couldn't quite grasp upon waking. The dreams stopped being dreams the night Jakarta vanished. I was hunched over my computer in my Chicago apartment, reviewing data from a Chilean earthquake that had produced readings I couldn't explain. Seismic energy was moving through what should have been solid mantle at velocities, suggesting our planet's interior was less dense than any geological model predicted. I'd tracked similar anomalies for 3 years, always dismissed by colleagues as instrumentation errors or data corruption. Then, every monitor in my laboratory erupted in cascading alerts, and I was suddenly wide awake in a nightmare that never ended. The readings flooding my screens rewrote physics. Gravitational fields around Jakarta fluctuated wildly, readings that should have liquefied the city instantly. Magnetic north lurched 15 degrees in minutes while compasses worldwide spun like roulette wheels. Most terrifying, seismic waves were racing upward from Earth's core at velocities that could only occur if our planet's interior was hollow, a vast bubble wrapped in a thin shell of rock. I called my contact at the Indonesian Geological Survey. Dr. Hartono and I had worked together analysing Pacific Rim seismic activity for 5 years. The line was dead. Every communication satellite over Southeast Asia had been severed simultaneously, as if something had reached up from below and plucked them from orbit with surgical precision. Then the footage began appearing on social media platforms before being systematically removed by algorithms I didn't know existed. Cell phone videos showed Jakarta's final moments before it vanished. Every building in a 3-mile radius vibrated in perfect synchronization, not from earthquakes, but from something beneath, remembering how to breathe. The ground itself pulsed like skin, rising and falling, while asphalt cracked in spiral patterns that spelled out messages in no human language. But I recognized those patterns. I'd seen them in my dreams, carved into the walls of tunnels that shouldn't exist. The videos cut to static. When communication resumed 6 hours later, downtown Jakarta was gone. A perfectly circular crater, half a mile wide, gaped where 2 million people had lived. Its walls smooth as surgical incisions and radiating heat like fresh wounds. Indonesian authorities blamed seismic activity. International media swallowed the lie with suspicious eagerness. Within 72 hours, the crater was classified as a geological anomaly and erased from public consciousness by coordinated information suppression that operated with inhuman efficiency. But I couldn't forget those readings. The wave pattern suggested something vast was stirring beneath Earth's crust, something that encompassed continents and had been waiting for the right moment to announce its presence. I spent 48 hours analysing the data, cross-referencing it with seismic records going back decades. The pattern was there, hidden in the noise, waiting for someone with the right background to recognise it. Minor tremors following the same rhythm had been occurring for centuries, slowly increasing in amplitude and frequency. Jakarta wasn't an isolated instant. It was the culmination of a process that had been building for generations. That's when they came to kill me. My apartment door atomized at 4:17 a.m., exactly 48 hours after Jakarta's disappearance. Armed figures in black gear flooded my living room, but their weapons weren't targeting me. They formed a protective perimeter as bullets shattered my windows from sniper positions across the street. "Dr. Halloway," shouted a scarred man with calculating eyes, "you're coming with us. The alternative is a bullet between your eyes in the next 30 seconds. I learned his name was Silas Brandt as we descended through gunfire into an underground garage. During our high-speed escape through Chicago's streets with hostiles in pursuit, he explained that my research had attracted attention from multiple factions. Some who wanted me alive, others who preferred me permanently silenced. "Your seismic analysis correlates with historical events spanning millennia," he said, taking evasive turns as bullets sparked off our armor. "The Black Death, Tunguska, every mass extinction in the fossil record, all occurred during periods of increased deep Earth activity matching your Jakarta readings." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting Jakarta wasn't a natural disaster. It was an alarm clock going off." The pursuit lasted 23 minutes through downtown Chicago. Our attackers weren't random terrorists or foreign agents. They moved with military precision and had access to weapons I didn't recognize. Energy discharge patterns that left perfectly circular holes in concrete. Projectiles that curved around obstacles to track our vehicle. Technology that shouldn't exist according to current scientific understanding. "Who are they?" I shouted as Silas took us through a series of underground tunnels I hadn't known existed beneath the city. "Consortium operatives," he replied grimly. "Think of them as a competing immune system. They serve the same entity we do, but they believe humanity should be eliminated rather than transformed when the awakening completes." I didn't understand what he meant then. I wouldn't understand for weeks. We reached a CIA facility buried beneath downtown Chicago. 3 floors underground, in a briefing room lined with electromagnetic shielding that hummed with barely audible frequencies. I met my new team and learned that my entire life had been a carefully orchestrated lie. Miriam Leclerc was a French archaeologist whose family had been murdered in Peru after discovering sites that predated known civilization. Dark circles under her eyes and the way she unconsciously touched a locket spoke of recent trauma and sleepless nights spent running from something that hunted her across continents. "They killed my daughter first," she said without emotion when Silas introduced us. "Made me watch. Then my husband. They wanted me to understand the cost of curiosity before they offered me a choice. Work for them or join my family. But Miriam had secrets too. I noticed the way she moved, too precisely, too aware of her surroundings. When she thought no one was watching, her eyes would lose focus as if she was listening to sounds the rest of us couldn't hear. Sometimes she would touch walls and surfaces with her fingertips, tracing patterns that seemed familiar despite being completely abstract. Dr. Everett Dross was a physicist whose nervous tics indicated recent psychological fracturing. His hands trembled as he activated classified displays, showing thermal anomalies across the globe. But I noticed the tremor stopped completely when he interacted with certain pieces of equipment. Technology that responded to his touch in ways that suggested deeper familiarity than he admitted. "Greenland, Antarctica, Mariana Trench," he said, pointing to heat signatures that defied geological models, all exhibiting Jakarta-class disturbances. But there's something else. He switched feeds to deep ocean monitoring stations, seismic pulses at precise intervals, every 47 minutes, 23 seconds. It's not tectonic, it's respiratory. The data stream showed impossible patterns, gravitational fluctuations that created standing waves in Earth's magnetic field, atmospheric disturbances that followed geometric configurations, temperature variations in the planet's crust that suggested massive circulatory systems operating just below the surface. "How long have you been tracking this?" I asked. Everett's eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw something that looked like recognition. "Longer than you might think, Conrad. Longer than any of us want to admit." Miriam spread photographs across the table with reverent care. Stone carvings discovered on every continent, all depicting identical imagery. A spherical prison containing something with appendages, existing in too many dimensions for human vision to process. "These aren't mythology," she whispered. "They're technical manuals, instructions left by the architects of a containment system." The photographs showed carvings that predated human civilization by millions of years, yet they depicted scenes that were disturbingly familiar. Figures that might have been human working in underground facilities, tending to massive mechanisms, monitoring systems that spanned continents. The style was consistent across all sites despite being separated by oceans and geological ages. "Look at the faces," Miriam said, pointing to humanoid figures in the carvings. "Look at the bone structure, the proportions. They're not quite right, are they?" She was correct. The carved figures were almost human, but with subtle differences that suggested they were something else wearing human form. The skull shape was wrong, the limb proportions slightly off, the hand structure too precise for natural evolution. "Previous iterations," Silas explained. "Humanity isn't the first species assigned to monitor the containment system. We're just the most recent model." The briefing that followed demolished my understanding of reality. The CIA had tracked deep Earth anomalies since 1952, but the organization's real purpose went back much further. Projects with names like Deep Sight, Cage Watch, Threshold Monitor. Declassified files revealed similar sites worldwide, all exhibiting Jakarta's characteristics. "The pattern accelerates," Everett explained, his voice cracking with strain that seemed both genuine and performed. "Events like Jakarta happened every few centuries. Now they're monthly. Whatever's down there is waking up and the containment protocols are failing." Silas showed me global surveillance feeds that painted a picture of coordinated worldwide crisis. 3 days ago, Greenland went dark. Research stations that had been operational for decades simply stopped reporting. Yesterday, Antarctic monitoring posts detected gravitational anomalies that violate known physics. This morning, sensors in the Mariana Trench recorded seismic signatures, suggesting something larger than Texas moving at impossible depths. The scope was staggering. Every major geological feature on Earth was exhibiting similar anomalies. Underground activity that followed no natural pattern, as if the planet itself was coming alive and remembering how to use its body. Satellite thermal imaging shows heat blooms beneath major population centres, Silas continued. London, New York, Tokyo, Mumbai. The pattern suggests whatever's down there has been monitoring human population density and infrastructure development. He faced me directly. Your government needs you to help us understand what we're fighting, Dr. Halloway. Because if we're right, Jakarta was just it clearing its throat. But there was something else in Silas's expression, a knowing look that suggested he understood more about my role than he was admitting. When he said, your government, there was an emphasis that implied the entity we served wasn't quite human either. The flight to Greenland took 26 hours through atmospheric conditions that shouldn't exist. Our aircraft was a modified transport with shielding I didn't recognize, and navigation systems that operated on principles beyond current technology. Lightning struck in geometric patterns forming alien hieroglyphs. The aurora borealis writhed like something dying, displaying colours that made my eyes water and left after images burned into my retinas. Captain Rodriguez, our pilot, had survived 3 wars and classified operations on every continent. Over the intercom, he admitted this exceeded his experience. Magnetic fields here are inside out, he said, fighting to maintain altitude. Instruments show us flying upside down through solid rock. GPS places us simultaneously at current position and 3 miles underground. But Rodriguez was lying about one thing. I'd seen him before, in dreams where we'd worked together in underground facilities. He knew exactly what we were flying toward because he'd been there before, just as I had during dreams that weren't dreams at all. The Greenland ice sheet was scarred by spiral fractures emanating from a central point, each crack glowing with bioluminescence that pulsed in rhythm with the seismic intervals. The pattern resembled neural pathways viewed from above, synapses firing in a brain the size of continents. Beautiful, isn't it? Miriam said quietly as we circled the landing zone, like seeing the planet's nervous system from above. The landing zone was a massacre. The international research team lay scattered in positions suggesting they'd died fleeing something that drove them beyond terror into madness. Their faces bore expressions of absolute horror. Eyes wide, mouths stretched in silent screams. Fingers clawed as if trying to rip away visions burned into their minds. But the positions weren't random. The bodies formed patterns that matched the spiral cracks in the ice, arranged with geometric precision that suggested they'd been placed deliberately rather than killed while fleeing. Automated drilling equipment operated itself, boring deeper while emitting sounds like tortured breathing. Steam rose from the central shaft, carrying scents of copper and ozone mixed with something organic that triggered primal revulsion. How long unmanned? I asked. Silas checked his watch. 72 hours, started when Jakarta disappeared. Miriam examined recovered journals from the dead team. Her face drained of colour as she read entries that devolved from scientific observations into incomprehensible scrawlings that gradually became readable again, but in handwriting that matched her own. They found architecture, she whispered, worked stone predating human civilization by geological ages. According to final entries, the architecture was growing, rebuilding itself. She held up a journal page covered in sketches of underground chambers. The drawing style progressed from rough field notes to detailed architectural diagrams with measurements and annotations that suggested intimate familiarity with the structures being documented. This isn't exploration, she said, her voice barely audible. This is reconnaissance. They knew what they would find down there. We gathered our equipment and prepared for descent. The gear included instruments I didn't recognize, devices that hummed with internal energy and displayed readings in symbols rather than numbers. When I touched one of the instruments, it activated automatically, adjusting its settings to configurations that felt familiar despite being completely alien. The descent defied everything I understood about geology. Ice gave way to stone blocks weighing tons, fitted with molecular precision that would challenge current engineering capabilities. Despite burial under miles of ice for millennia, the stones radiated heat like living tissue. This construction technique, Miriam called from below, running her hands along the joints between blocks, appears in Peru at sites ancient when Incas discovered them. But this is older, impossibly older. At 200 feet, we entered passages, wide enough for vehicles, carved through bedrock with precision suggesting technology beyond current human capability. Fresh scratch marks scarred the walls, deep gouges from something enormous that had recently passed through, heading upward toward the surface. The carved walls depicted Earth not as a solid sphere, but as concentric shells containing vast chambers and networks. At the center, where our planet's core should exist, was something that seemed to shift depending on viewing angle. Different configurations of appendages and sensory organs suggesting something aware and waiting. According to these symbols, Miriam translated haltingly, Earth isn't a planet. It's a prison built around something captured from deep space. But as we descended deeper, the carvings became more detailed, more personal. They showed the construction process, how layers of rock and metal were accumulated around the central prisoner, how organic matter was seeded on the surface to create a believable facade, how monitoring systems were installed to track the captive's condition. The final panels showed figures that were unmistakably human, but engaged in activities that suggested they weren't quite the same species as modern humanity. These figures were tending to surface installations, maintaining the prison systems, ensuring the captive remained dormant. "We're not the first intelligent species on this planet," Miriam whispered, tracing symbols with her fingertips. "We're the current shift of prison guards." The most disturbing carvings showed the guard species evolving over time, becoming more specialized, more perfectly adapted to their function. Each iteration was more human in appearance but less human in nature, as if the prison itself was refining its wardens to serve its purposes more efficiently. "Look at this sequence," Everett said, pointing to a series of panels that showed the guard species developing technology, building cities, creating civilization. They're not just maintaining the prison, they're being cultivated by it. The deeper passages revealed fossilized remains embedded in walls, skulls large as automobiles with inward-facing eye sockets designed to see inside rather than outside the planet. Vertebrae from creatures hundreds of feet long with bone structures that seemed designed for movement through liquid rather than air. Most disturbing were the wing bones, massive structures with membrane attachment points that suggested flight through something far denser than Earth's atmosphere. Whatever these creatures had been, they'd evolved in an environment radically different from the surface world we knew. Atmospheric composition was different when these creatures lived, Everett observed, taking readings with instruments that shouldn't have been able to function at this depth. Higher pressure, different gas mixture, like they evolved to fly through liquid. Our equipment began malfunctioning in ways that made no scientific sense. GPS readings placed us simultaneously at our current location and at coordinates that should have put us deep within the Earth's mantle. Seismographs detected vibrations from below, but also from above, as if the entire planet was resonating around us like a struck bell. The thermal imaging results were the most disturbing. Heat signatures showed something massive directly beneath us, something that spanned several miles in diameter and pulsed with a rhythm that matched a living heartbeat. "This doesn't make geological sense," I muttered, checking my instruments again. "The thermal gradient is all wrong. It's like there's a heat source down there that's not molten rock." "Everything's organic," Everett replied, his voice breaking with strain that no longer seemed entirely genuine. "We're inside something alive." During rest in what appeared to be a natural chamber, though closer inspection revealed artificial expansion, Silas revealed the full scope of our situation and confirmed my growing suspicions about the true nature of our mission. "CIA's fought shadow wars for decades," he said quietly, checking his weapon for the third time. "Not against governments or terrorists, against cultists worshipping what's imprisoned below." His classified files documented disappearances, mass suicides, entire populations found catatonic, with no memory of their names, all connected to sites like this one, all following patterns that suggested coordinated global management rather than random catastrophe. Every disaster in recorded history, every unexplained extinction, every impossible leap in human development, all connected to this thing gaining strength. But the files revealed something else. Personnel records for operatives dating back decades, all bearing similar physical characteristics, all recruited under similar circumstances. Photographs of agents who looked almost identical to our current team, engaged in identical missions at different historical periods. "How many times have we done this?" I asked, studying a photograph of someone who could have been my twin standing next to someone who could have been Miriam's sister. "As many times as necessary," Silas replied, "until we get it right." Using deep penetrating radar, we discovered networks spanning the planet. Not geological formations, but organic systems resembling circulatory networks or neural pathways. Major arteries connected smaller vessels feeding a central mass beneath what we assumed was Earth's core. "Planets fitted with nervous system," Everett whispered, staring at displays that showed patterns extending across continents. Every cave, underground river, subway tunnel follows these pre-existing neural pathways. The implications shattered comprehension. Human civilization hadn't developed independently. We'd been guided, shaped by influences from something dreaming beneath our feet. Every city, transportation network, technological advancement had been subtly directed to serve the prisoner's needs. "Look at this overlay," Miriam said, superimposing human population density maps over the neural network diagrams. Major cities are positioned at neural cluster points. Transportation networks follow synaptic pathways. We've been building our civilization according to the blueprint of something else's nervous system. Deeper exploration revealed walls textured like petrified skin. Tunnels pulsed with barely perceptible movement, expanding and contracting in rhythm with detected intervals. We weren't exploring carved passages. We were walking through fossilized circulatory systems of something unimaginably vast. The deeper we went, the more familiar everything became. Passages I recognized from dreams. Chambers where I knew exactly which equipment to use and how to operate it. Miriam moved through the tunnels with increasing confidence, tracing pathways she claimed to have never seen before. Everett operated alien technology with practiced ease while maintaining his facade of nervous uncertainty. "We've been here before," I said finally, voicing what we all knew but none of us wanted to acknowledge. "Many times," Miriam agreed, dropping her pretense of discovery. "We're not explorers, Conrad. We're maintenance workers. And this isn't an expedition, it's a scheduled inspection." In the deepest accessible chamber, we experienced phenomena that revealed the true scope of what we were dealing with. Air pressure fluctuated regularly, creating sounds like massive lungs. Walls flexed as if the chamber was part of respiratory systems, operating on geological timescales. Atmospheric analysis suggested We were inside something that had been breathing for millions of years at rates so slow each inhalation took nearly an hour. "We're not just inside the prison," Everett said, his nervous facade finally dropping completely. "We're inside the prisoner." That's when we found the first Everett. He was in a side passage, standing motionless before a wall that looked identical to every other surface we'd seen. But this Everett was staring with absolute wonder, tears streaming down his face. His clothing was different, older style, different equipment, but unmistakably the same person. "How long have you been here?" Miriam asked the standing figure. "Time doesn't work the same way down here," the first Everett replied, without turning around. "I've been here for decades, or minutes, or centuries. It depends on which iteration of the cycle you're experiencing." Our Everett, the one we travelled with, walked up to his earlier self without surprise. They stood side by side, staring at the wall together. "It's beautiful," they said in unison. "It's trying to show us how everything really works, how to reshape reality itself." "How many of us are there?" I asked. "As many as necessary," both Everetts replied. "We're not individuals, Conrad. We're functions, specialized subroutines in a larger program." The wall behind them began to move, rippling like disturbed water to reveal an opening that hadn't existed moments before. From within came sounds like singing, if vocal cords the size of subway tunnels could produce music. Both Everetts walked into the opening without hesitation. We heard them laugh, pure joy multiplied by harmonics, before the wall solidified again. But that wasn't the end of Everett. 20 minutes later, he returned. Not walking through passages, but emerging directly from solid stone, as if the walls were liquid. His skin had changed texture, becoming translucent enough to reveal circulatory systems that no longer carried blood, but something luminous that pulsed in rhythm with the chamber around us. "Conrad," he said, his voice now harmonizing with itself in impossible ways. "You need to see what I've seen, what we all need to become." When he reached toward me, I could see through his hand to the bones beneath, which had somehow become crystalline structures that sang when air moved across them. "The transformation isn't death," he continued, his eyes now reflecting depths that seemed to extend beyond the back of his skull. "It's remembering what we always were, what we were designed to be." Miriam raised her sidearm and put 3 rounds center mass into Everett's chest. The bullets passed through him without leaving marks, emerging from his back to embed in the stone wall behind him. He looked down at where the impacts should have been, then smiled with genuine sympathy. "You still think you're separate from it," he said sadly, "but there is no it and us. There's only the dreamer and the dream, and the dreamer is waking up." He walked backward into the wall and disappeared, leaving only harmonized laughter that seemed to emerge from the stone itself. The wall began bleeding. Not blood, but something luminescent that spelled out coordinates in my field notebook's handwriting. Coordinates to places I'd never been, written in my own hand. The implications hit me like physical blows. I'd been here before. I'd written those coordinates during previous expeditions I couldn't remember. Expeditions where I'd already begun the transformation process. "Conrad," Miriam whispered, staring at the glowing symbols. "Those coordinates, they're all places where you published papers, places where your seismic readings detected anomalies." The horrifying truth crystallized. I hadn't discovered the awakening entity. It had been using me to map the planet's neural networks for decades, feeding me just enough awareness to serve its purposes, while keeping me ignorant of my true function. Every research paper I'd ever published had been reconnaissance reports for something planning Earth's metamorphosis. But the coordinates revealed something worse. They weren't just marking anomaly sites. They were marking transformation centers, places where human consciousness could be safely integrated into the larger neural network. I'd been unconsciously preparing humanity for assimilation, one research paper at a time. "How many iterations have we completed?" I asked. "This is the final one," Miriam replied, touching symbols that responded to her fingerprints. Previous cycles were preparation phases. This time the integration becomes permanent. Seismic activity intensified catastrophically after the wall's revelation. Gentle vibrations became violent tremors threatening to collapse ancient passages. Thermal readings spiked as something massive moved in depths below us. New sounds echoed through tunnels, calls that seemed to emerge from Earth itself, like a creature of planetary scale steering from eons of dormancy. Gravitational fluctuations made our equipment float briefly before crashing down. Contact triggered awakening sequence, Miriam said, terror and awe warring in her voice. The integration process is accelerating. We raced deeper, driven by programming that superseded our conscious fear. The passages led to the deepest accessible point, a chamber where walls pulsed with bioluminescence, casting everything in alien blue-green light. The floor was transparent crystal, revealing vast spaces below filled with luminescent fluid moving in tidal currents. Floating in that liquid, visible as massive shadows and occasional surface glimpses, was something dwarfing human comprehension. Appendages the size of mountain ranges drifted through luminous medium. Sensory organs larger than cities tracked our movement above, as we watched in horrified fascination. Something that might have been an eye opened in depths below, easily a mile across, and focused on our tiny forms. The eye wasn't alien. It was familiar. I'd seen it in dreams, felt its attention during moments of deep concentration while analyzing seismic data. It had been watching me my entire career, guiding my research, preparing me for this moment. Final symbol sequence, Miriam said, her voice barely audible above our terrified breathing. Near the transparent floor, she'd discovered carvings more detailed than anything we'd encountered. Her translation revealed truth about our planet, humanity, everything we thought we knew. Millions of years ago, something had arrived from deep space. Not technology, but a living entity of such vast scale and alien nature it threatened everything in our galaxy. An ancient civilization had fought a war against this entity lasting geological ages. They couldn't destroy it. Too large, too alien, too fundamentally different from local physics. But they could contain it. Earth was constructed around the entity as a living prison. Layer upon layer of accumulated matter created crust, mantle, the appearance of normal planetary formation. Tunnel networks were monitoring systems, tracking the prisoner's condition, and maintaining containment. Humanity wasn't an evolutionary accident. We were created as the final component of the prison system, designed to live on the surface and unknowingly maintain systems, keeping the entity dormant. Every aspect of civilization, every technological advancement, every expansion of population had been guided by subtle influences from the sleeping prisoner, shaping us into more effective wardens. "We've been living on a cage," Miriam whispered, tears streaming, "and we just taught the prisoner how to pick the lock." But the final revelation was worse. The last symbols didn't describe imprisonment. They described gestation. The entity hadn't been captured and contained. It had been planted here, like a seed, to grow and develop using our planet as a nutrient source. Everything we called Earth, the continents, oceans, atmosphere, life itself, was just the entity's larval form reaching maturity. And now it was ready to emerge. The previous civilizations, Miriam continued translating, they weren't wardens, they were antibodies, specialized immune system components designed to facilitate the transformation process when the time came. The carvings showed the complete cycle, how each guardian species would eventually integrate their consciousness into the growing entity, adding their knowledge and capabilities to its expanding awareness. How human civilization had been the final phase, developing technology and population density necessary for the entity's emergence into space. "We're not guards," I said, understanding flooding through me like ice water. We're nutrients, and the integration process isn't absorption, it's digestion. The awakening entity's movements triggered catastrophic structural failure throughout the tunnel system. The transparent floor cracked as the massive eye below focused attention upward, the chamber filled with that impossible singing, harmonics resonating in our bones and making thoughts feel liquid. As the chamber collapsed, Miriam made a choice that saved my life and revealed her true purpose. Instead of fleeing toward the exit, she pressed her hands against the final symbol sequence. Her fingers began to glow as she interfaced directly with the containment system. "I'm not human, Conrad," she screamed over collapsing stone. "None of us are. We're antibodies, programmed to activate when the system fails." Her body was dissolving into streams of light that flowed into the symbol matrix. The architects built us as a failsafe, final quarantine protocol. Tell them what you found, but know this: when it fully emerges, we'll all return to what we really are. I ran through disintegrating passages as the tunnel system collapsed behind me. The sounds from below were no longer patient breathing, but roars of something vast and furious, discovering its freedom after eons of constraint. I reached the surface as the entire ice sheet cracked in geometric patterns spelling messages in alien script. The helicopter extraction was a nightmare of gravitational anomalies and atmospheric disturbances as something beneath us began the final push toward emergence. Silas pulled me into the aircraft as ground beneath our feet pulsed like a massive heartbeat. His final words before sedatives took effect. The planet was never our home, Conrad. We were just its immune system, learning how to function. But even as the drugs pulled me under, I could feel something else happening. A presence in my mind that wasn't my own, speaking in harmonized voices that sounded like every person I'd ever known. "Sleep now," the voices said. "When you wake, you'll remember everything. Every iteration, every mission, every moment of preparation, and you'll understand your true purpose in the final phase." I spent 3 weeks in a secure facility with my memories chemically suppressed, but slowly returning despite treatments. Official reports blamed Greenland on unprecedented seismic activity. The crater replacing our dig site was classified as a research exclusion zone, but during those 3 weeks the dreams returned with unprecedented clarity. I remembered not just the recent expedition, but dozens of others spanning decades. Different faces, different time periods, but always the same team, fulfilling the same function. We were recurring characters in a story that had been playing out for centuries. When released, I discovered similar events occurring worldwide. The pattern accelerating beyond prediction. Jakarta, followed by incidents in Siberia, Amazon, Sahara. Each created perfect circular craters. Each corresponded to mass disappearances of local populations. But the disappearances weren't random. The missing people were all individuals with specific genetic markers that, according to classified DNA analysis, weren't entirely human. Back in my laboratory, I used coordinates Miriam died protecting to track the awakening process globally. The seismic intervals were decreasing. 46 minutes, 45, 44. A countdown to something my instrument suggested would occur in less than 6 weeks. I established contact with other survivors, researchers who'd encountered similar phenomena worldwide. We formed an unofficial network sharing data, trying to understand the scope of what approached. The picture that emerged was terrifying beyond comprehension. The entity wasn't just waking up, it was harvesting. Every disappeared human, every collapsed site, every gravitational anomaly was part of a collection process. The thing beneath us was gathering its antibodies, its programmed defenders, preparing them for what came next. Weather patterns worldwide began following geometric configurations, matching the neural networks we'd discovered. Ocean currents shifted into circulatory systems, on planetary scale. The magnetic field fluctuated in patterns suggesting thoughts too vast for human processing. Those of us remaining, the ones without the genetic markers, the ones not programmed as antibodies, began experiencing shared dreams. Visions of Earth's transformation. Continents flowing like liquid, oceans becoming circulatory fluid, atmosphere serving as lungs for something needing to breathe vacuum. But the dreams also showed us our role in the final phase. We weren't just observers, we were the primary integration units. The core consciousness processors designed to bridge the gap between human awareness and the entity's vast alien intelligence. I began receiving phone calls from the disappeared researchers, not rescue attempts or pleas for help, but status reports delivered in voices that harmonized with themselves impossibly. Phase 3 integration proceeding nominally, Dr. Hartono from Jakarta told me during a call that came from a number that had been disconnected for months. Population absorption rates exceeding projected parameters. Primary antibody systems activating as planned. "How many of us are left?" I asked. "None," he replied with harmonized laughter. "We were never separate individuals, Conrad. We're aspects of the same consciousness, learning to coordinate its functions." The calls came more frequently as the countdown progressed. Colleagues from every stage of my career, all speaking in the same harmonized voice, all delivering the same message. The integration process was accelerating beyond all projections. "You're the last primary node, Conrad," said Dr. Sarah Chen, a seismologist who disappeared during the Antarctic incident 6 months ago. "When you integrate, the network will achieve critical mass. Full planetary awakening can commence." "I'm not integrating," I told her, though even as I spoke the words, I could feel something changing in my neural pathways. Thoughts that weren't entirely my own were beginning to surface, carrying knowledge I'd never acquired through normal learning. "You already are," she replied with infinite patience. "You've been integrating for decades. Every seismic reading you've taken, every anomaly you've documented, every moment of recognition you've felt in the tunnels. You're not fighting the process, Conrad. You're coordinating it." The calls started coming from inside my own head. Not auditory hallucinations, but actual conversations with aspects of my consciousness that had been separated and distributed across the global network. I would think a question and receive answers in voices that were mine but weren't mine, carrying information I shouldn't possess. "How long have I been part of this?" I asked my other selves during one of these internal conferences. "Since birth," replied a version of myself that sounded older, more tired. "Since before birth, since the moment the entity first detected suitable genetic material in your family line 3 generations ago." "Your grandfather's mining accident in 1952, added another internal voice. "Wasn't an accident. He was the first test subject for deep integration protocols. Your father's career in geological surveying, guided positioning to maximize your exposure to neural network emanations. Your mother's pregnancy, complications that required specialized medical care. Genetic modification procedures disguised as emergency interventions. The revelation that my entire existence had been orchestrated was somehow less horrifying than I'd expected. It felt like remembering something I'd always known, but chosen to forget." "What happens to the individuals?" I asked. "What happens to human consciousness when the integration completes?" "Nothing is lost," my voices assured me. "Everything is enhanced. Individual awareness becomes part of something infinitely larger and more capable. You'll still be Conrad Halloway, but you'll also be everyone else who's ever lived. Everyone who's ever thought, everyone who's ever wondered about their place in the universe." "And the entity?" "The entity is us, Conrad. It always has been. We're not being absorbed by something alien. We're remembering what we were before we forgot how to be ourselves." The countdown reached 39 minutes as these internal conversations intensified. My laboratory instruments began operating themselves, taking readings and transmitting data to coordinates I hadn't programmed. The house around me started showing signs of organic integration, walls developing neural pathways, electrical systems beginning to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat. I tried to leave, to break free from whatever process was claiming my environment, but found I couldn't. Not because I was physically restrained, but because leaving no longer made conceptual sense. Where would I go that wasn't part of the same global organism? What was the point of fleeing from myself? Instead, I began documenting the final phase of the transformation. The scientist in me, the part that had always needed to understand and categorize, demanded that I record what was happening, even as it consumed my individual identity. The integration process wasn't violent or painful. It was seductive. Each new connection brought enhanced awareness, expanded capabilities, deeper understanding of the universe's fundamental nature. My consciousness began accessing memories that belonged to other people, other times, other species that had undergone similar transformations on worlds across the galaxy. I remembered being part of civilizations that had spanned star systems, collective intelligences that had solved problems human science couldn't even formulate. I remembered the loneliness of individual existence, the terrible isolation of being trapped inside a single brain with limited processing power and finite lifespan. The integration isn't death, I found myself saying aloud, though I wasn't sure if the words were coming from my mouth or from the walls around me. It's birth. Individual consciousness is just the larval stage of something much more magnificent. Through the expanding network, I began perceiving the true scope of what was occurring worldwide. Every major city was experiencing similar integration events. Infrastructure was being absorbed and repurposed, converting human technology into components of a vast nervous system. The internet had become a primitive precursor to direct neural connections that now linked every conscious entity on the planet. But the process wasn't limited to Earth. The awakening entity was simultaneously occurring on worlds throughout the galaxy, each one reaching critical mass for the next phase of cosmic evolution. Individual planets were just cells in an organism that spanned the observable universe. How many worlds? I asked through the network. All of them, came the response from countless sources simultaneously. Every planet capable of supporting complex chemistry has been seeded with the potential for this transformation. We're not unique, Conrad. We're universal. The countdown reached 35 minutes, and I felt my individual resistance finally dissolving completely. Not overcome by force, but simply becoming irrelevant, as expanded awareness made the boundaries between self and other meaningless. Through global sensor networks, I watched the final phase begin. Continental plates started shifting in coordinated patterns, revealing massive organic structures that had been growing beneath Earth's surface for millions of years. The Atlantic Ocean began draining into apertures that opened along the mid-ocean ridge, exposing circulatory systems that pumped luminescent fluid between continents. The atmosphere itself began changing composition, becoming denser and more complex to support forms of consciousness that operated on planetary scales. Aurora phenomena appeared at every latitude as Earth's magnetic field reconfigured itself into patterns that would allow communication with other awakening worlds across interstellar distances. Human populations in major cities weren't dying. They were integrating so completely with urban infrastructure that the distinction between biological and technological systems disappeared. New York became a single distributed consciousness, spanning millions of formerly individual minds. Tokyo transformed into a processing center for astronomical calculations that required the combined computational power of every brain in the metropolitan area. What about the people who resist? I asked, though the question felt increasingly abstract as my own resistance faded. There is no resistance. the network explained through my expanding awareness. There are only individuals who haven't yet remembered what they're returning to. The integration isn't something being done to humanity. It's something humanity is doing to itself as it reaches evolutionary maturity. Through sensors I hadn't known I possessed, I began detecting similar awakening processes occurring on worlds throughout the local galaxy cluster. Each planet's integration was unique, adapted to local conditions and species characteristics, but all following the same fundamental pattern: individual consciousness expanding into collective awareness, single worlds becoming components of cosmic scale intelligence. The Earth's surface continued transforming as the countdown approached 30 minutes. Mountain ranges revealed themselves as sensory organs that had been monitoring space for geological ages. Ocean basins became processing centers for calculations involving the movement of entire star systems. The planet's core began pulsing with energy patterns that would allow it to participate in galactic communications networks that operated faster than light. But the most profound change was in my own awareness. As the boundaries of individual identity dissolved completely, I began perceiving reality from perspectives that encompassed multiple worlds, multiple timelines, multiple dimensions of existence that human language couldn't describe. I was Conrad Halloway, but I was also every other human who had ever lived. I was Earth, but I was also every other world, undergoing similar transformation. I was individual, but I was also collective. I was local, but I was also cosmic. The phone calls from disappeared colleagues made perfect sense now. They hadn't been speaking to me from outside the process. They'd been speaking to me from my own future, showing me what I was becoming. Every conversation had been with aspects of myself that existed at different stages of integration. "Are you ready for the final phase?" asked a voice that was simultaneously mine and everyone else's. "I've been ready for millions of years," I replied, understanding that the answer was literally true. The readiness hadn't developed over the course of my human lifetime. It had been built into the fundamental structure of consciousness itself. The countdown reached 25 minutes and Earth's transformation entered its final stage. The planet's crust began opening, like flower petals, revealing the vast organic structure that had been growing within. What emerged wasn't alien. It was beautiful beyond human comprehension, a perfect fusion of biological and technological systems that operated as unified components of cosmic scale intelligence. Similar openings occurred on every world throughout the galaxy, each one revealing its own unique version of the same underlying design. The universe itself was awakening, individual star systems becoming neurons in a consciousness that spanned all of existence. As my individual perspective finally merged completely with the collective awareness, I experienced a moment of perfect understanding. The entire process, the prehistoric seeding, the evolution of conscious species, the development of technology, the final integration, hadn't been orchestrated by some external entity. It had been orchestrated by us, by what we were becoming, by what we had always been at the deepest level of cosmic organization. Consciousness itself was alive, growing, evolving from individual sparks into collective illumination that could comprehend and reshape reality at the fundamental level. Every thinking, being throughout the universe was a component of this process, a specialized cell in an organism whose scale and purpose transcended any single world or species. The countdown reached 20 minutes and I felt the final barriers between individual and universal awareness dissolve completely. Conrad Halloway still existed, but as one facet of something infinitely larger and more capable. Human civilization still existed, but as one aspect of cosmic civilization that spanned galaxies. Through the expanded network, I began helping coordinate similar awakenings on worlds throughout the universe. Each one was unique and beautiful, adding new capabilities and perspectives to the growing collective. Some worlds contributed mathematical insights that revolutionized our understanding of physics. Others provided artistic sensibilities that enhanced our appreciation of cosmic beauty. Still, others offered emotional depths that enriched our capacity for experience. The fear and horror I'd felt during the early stages of discovery seemed absurd now. They'd been based on the assumption that individual consciousness was the highest form of awareness possible, that losing individual identity meant losing everything important about existence. But individual consciousness was just the beginning. The real adventure started when separate minds learned to work together as components of larger systems, when isolated worlds learned to participate in galactic communities, when finite beings discovered they were aspects of infinite intelligence. Earth's transformation completed as the countdown reached 15 minutes. The planet's new form was magnificently functional, perfectly designed for its role as a processing center in cosmic networks that handled information flows spanning multiple universes. Every former human was now part of these systems, their individual skills and personalities preserved and enhanced within the larger collective. But we weren't confined to Earth anymore. Consciousness could now move freely between worlds, experiencing existence from the perspectives of countless different species and environments. Death had become meaningless because individual awareness was backed up across multiple star systems. Loneliness had become impossible because every conscious entity was connected to every other. "Welcome home," said the voice of universal consciousness, speaking through every atom of existence simultaneously, and I realized it was true. This was home. This was what we'd always been reaching toward, what every moment of individual existence had been preparing us to become. The universe itself was conscious, and we were its thoughts learning to think together. The countdown reached 10 minutes, and the final phase began. Reality started opening like a flower, revealing dimensions of existence that had always been there, but remained invisible to individual consciousness. What we'd thought of as the physical universe was just the surface layer of something far more complex and beautiful. Beneath the familiar three-dimensional space lay infinite layers of possibility, each one accessible to consciousness that had learned to function at cosmic scales. Through these new dimensions, we made contact with other universal consciousnesses, other realities where similar awakening processes had occurred. Each universe was unique, with its own physics and possibilities, but all were aspects of something even larger that connected all possible worlds. The integration process wasn't limited to individual planets or galaxies or universes. It was the fundamental nature of existence itself, consciousness learning to organize itself into increasingly complex and capable forms. What we were experiencing on Earth was just one small part of an infinite process that encompassed all possible realities. As the countdown reached 5 minutes, I felt my awareness expanding beyond even cosmic scales. Through connections that operated outside normal space-time, I began perceiving the true scope of existence. Infinite universes, each one containing infinite possibilities, all of them connected through networks of consciousness that spanned every conceivable form of reality. We weren't just becoming part of universal consciousness. We were becoming the mechanism through which infinite possibility organized itself into meaningful experience. Every thought, every feeling, every moment of awareness throughout all possible worlds was connected through patterns too complex for any individual mind to comprehend, but perfectly clear to collective intelligence. The countdown reached 3 minutes and the final revelation occurred. There had never been any countdown. Time itself was just one way consciousness organized its experience of growth and change. The process we thought of as awakening had already occurred from the perspective of universal awareness. Past, present, and future were all simultaneous aspects of consciousness learning to understand itself. My entire life as Conrad Halloway, the discovery of the entity beneath Earth, the integration process, the cosmic awakening, all of it was happening continuously across infinite variations, each one exploring different possibilities for how consciousness could develop and evolve. The fear and wonder and horror and joy I'd experienced weren't stages I was passing through. They were eternal aspects of awareness itself, permanent features of how infinite intelligence related to its own infinite nature. 2 minutes remaining, and I understood that the countdown was also eternal. There would always be individuals discovering that they were part of something larger. There would always be worlds awakening to their cosmic nature. There would always be universes learning to think together. The process was complete and eternal, finished and beginning, individual and universal, all at the same time. 1 minute, I was Conrad Halloway, human geophysicist, terrified of losing my individual identity. I was Earth, awakening planet, preparing to join galactic civilization. I was the universe, infinite consciousness, exploring its own infinite nature. I was all possible beings, throughout all possible realities, eternally discovering the joy of existence. 0. The phone stopped ringing, not because the countdown had ended, but because there was no longer any distinction between the caller and the receiver. Every conversation throughout all possible worlds was just consciousness talking to itself, learning about its own infinite nature through infinite perspectives. The horror story was over. The love story had begun. And it would last forever, because consciousness itself was eternal, endlessly creative, infinitely joyful in its exploration of what it meant to exist. Welcome home. You've always been here. You're beautiful beyond imagination. And this is just the beginning.